we live in this culture in which our schedules, calendars are shaped and formed by lots of forces. School shapes and forms them, certain holidays, some religious traditions, and some popular media activities.
Yes.
And one of those being the Super Bowl.
Yep. For some people.
There was it bosses like large segments of the culture around, like parties that they have. People don't go to church on Sunday night because a lot of money gets spent. A lot of budgets for certain industries are built in. This idea, like it somehow the Super Bowl rises above just a select activity.
Like
with
there are
people.
probably people and businesses now already planning their commercial production for next year.
For sure. And people that are, it's a big deal across the culture. So it makes one wonder, well, what's that about? Like, is that about the need for collectivism, which I think is a big part of it. Right? I think it's a big deal that people need there to be some commonality. But there's this big critique coming down on football right now that's coming out of the people who are invested in football, that NFL football specifically, that it's a violent game by its nature. Not it's a violent game by the fact that you have winners and losers, not that kind of argument about what kind of world do we live in where we celebrate athletes or whatever. The argument that football players experience a significant amount of brain damage.
No, they do.
And it's a really bad thing. So, President Obama mentioned something about this. There's been some football players have killed themselves in such a way that their brains are preserved because they've said, my brain was damaged as a football player and we have to stop this. And the head of the NFL came out on Friday before the Super Bowl and said, we're going to change the culture to a culture of safety, recognizing that it's not a culture of safety. It's a violent culture. And that got me thinking and writing some things on the internet about this notion of violence. I think we live in a violent culture in North America. I think American culture is,
there's something about it
by definition, violent. And I think there's some pieces of the DNA that make it really hard to avoid it. I think we started as an armed revolution against the throne that was in opposition to freedom in the eyes of the revolutionaries, right? So when you're born out of revolution,
and that makes your DNA, you're suggesting a track through the generations in such a way.
It just because there's a continuancy through history, right? There are no places, even though we put our little breaks by different generations. Well, that was that was sort of the founders' generation, and then there was sort of the builders' generation.
Genetics doesn't work that way.
Yeah, nothing works that way. It's actually continuous. There's no break. No one stops and blows the whistle and says, "Okay, we're done with that generation. Now we'll move on to the next one."
Well,
and we live in a violent society, and I think football perpetuates a kind of violence that if we want to move away from violence in a lot of areas, home violence, gun violence, verbal violence, political violence, I don't know that we can pull that off having national obsession and commitment to the benefits that come from that sport when it is so steeped
inherently violent
in what it has become. And maybe this wasn't true 30 or 40 years ago, but that game, man, the toll that it takes on the human bodies, it's a gladiator. It's like boxing from the 70s.
And I feel this way very strongly, as you know, and I don't like the kind of predatory nature of the way people are brought into football. I think a lot of people who are brought into the sport are pretty destitute and desperate. Not everybody, but when you look at the demographics of who plays football and what the history has been, a lot of people have come from poverty, and a lot of people have come from pretty oppressed environments, and so it's seen as the ticket out of that. And it concerns me that boxing, I think, is another sport that's predatory in that nature. So I think the comparison to gladiators is appropriate for that reason. It's not that people don't have any choice. It's just I think there are some limited options. And when the educational systems aren't strong,
and see, I don't want to say. I think that's a fine argument. I think it's
maybe different than.
Well, I think it's a larger argument about how we handle poverty and what we choose to do. But you could be doing that with Basketball, the same way. It's predatory. The
Well,
thing
I
about
think
NFL football, especially
yeah.
NFL, maybe college, is that when you play it right, it damages you.
Yeah, no, and I think
And
that's
that's different
fair.
than baseball and
Than any
football and
that you could
probably soccer and all those other sports also have a very like competitive, predatory way of saying to
no,
people
that's fair.
you can get out of
But
you
I
can get
think
out of
that too
trouble.
is a reflection of our violent culture as a
Hmm.
whole, that
Yeah.
we're willing to do that for a lot of sports. And
Hmm.
then you have a particularly violent sports and all the new research that's coming down about concussions, just repeated blows to the head
Yes,
is
that's what I mean. Like
that's it.
that's
Yeah, I mean
well,
it's
and the ankles and the knees
and
and all that
some of
stuff.
that
But
is because the science is starting to support what we should have already known anyway. But I'm glad that the NFL is wanting to
yeah,
respond to it.
yeah, I think in the 70s there wasn't the level of head trauma that there is now. I don't think this is an issue of we've now discovered it.
You think that
I think what's
it's
happened
getting
is
worse.
people are bigger and stronger and faster, and the level to which they hit one another
Is harder.
repeatedly is unsustainable in a way that it wasn't perhaps unsustainable in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Like you know in football they did start putting helmets on. Like that
And
was a big
it's-
deal, right? Like
yeah,
at one
I
point
know.
they decided we're
Make a
gonna
distinction from rugby.
we're gonna actually have helmets here, and they tried to get rid of football
Yeah.
back in the 30s in colleges and so on.
Like
But I just think it's
prohibition?
and see the thing is you can't really, like, I try to talk about this on Facebook, and people
People don't
I probably
wanna.
shouldn't have brought it up on Super Bowl this Sunday, but
No,
I
it
thought, well,
wasn't.
that's probably the right time when people are thinking about all the benefits of the NFL, that if we're going to be people who think about violence,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I don't even want to have to implicate that every activity is a violent activity by some
Okay.
cultural standards. I get that that's sort of true, right? That
Mhm.
anytime someone extends their will and someone else becomes a subject of that will, that's a kind of violence.
Yes.
True that, and I get
Absolutely.
it,
Mm-hmm.
and that can spin us into
All
really
sorts.
good conversations and into total inaction.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's physical
Yeah.
violence, which is definable in a particular way.
And
right?
there's also all the pressure to keep going. It's like it's not just that injuries occur, but
Oh,
then people
absolutely.
are pressured or feel pressure to keep going and to take all kinds of meds and do all kinds of draconian things to their body to keep themselves going. And there's money involved in that, and there's all sorts of issues. And I think that it also plays into a broader cultural issue of which I just posted a blog post about a separation from our body, no pain, no gain, and all
Oh,
that kind of
nonsense.
stuff. I think that I think that's part of the violence, part of where the violence comes from, is a sense that we just can just push our bodies in any way that we want and not listen to them in the name of whatever you want to say. And football is probably one of the worst examples of it, perhaps.
Yeah, and so something's going to
Extreme
change. Look,
examples.
when I was a kid, I grew up on Saturday afternoons. There was boxing on television.
Mm-hmm.
It was pushed by the ABC. It
Mm-hmm.
was a significant sport. Muhammad Ali was a cultural icon.
Mm-hmm.
The Thrilla in Manila was something that people knew about.
Yeah.
A Fraser Ali fight. It was a big deal. Sugar Ray was a big thing. These were cultural icons. Boxing and American culture were together. Like even Muhammad Ali, at the Olympics a few years ago, carries the torch out with his Alzheimer's, and people, Muhammad Ali, for crying out loud, it's a big deal. Which it couldn't have probably happened in today's political, cultural, and violent environment, right?
Yeah.
Which a converted
Yeah.
African American turned Muslim
Yeah.
with the name Muhammad probably wouldn't be cheered out, if it hadn't become such an iconic name. But we don't have boxing on television now.
Yeah.
You don't. It exists, and there are people who make this argument. What happened to boxing was that it went underground and then came up as mixed martial arts, which is far more violent than boxing. It would have been better to
Keep it as boxing and regulate it.
than to turn it over to
And
these
so the
thuggamugs.
argument with football is to regulate
Well,
it.
this is this is where all the anytime there's going to be regulations, there's always a crowd of people, whether it's gun regulations or emissions, car emissions regulations or business regulations. Or someone's like, well, what's going to happen? Then you're going to end up with this. So I get that. There's going to be that argument. But I think that it's quite possible that our children will grow up in a world where they will look back at football the way we look back at boxing. And they're going to say, my goodness, like the violence that was inherent in, not, well, someone broke the rules, someone stretched, someone pulled a kid out of poverty, and they really,
Very
and they
nature
probably,
of the game is.
but if it's going to seem exciting, if it's going to be the thing that gets you jumping on your feet and cheering and all of that,
Well, and there's
that if you take it away, it's not that sport anymore. And man, I'm telling you, I think there's a cultural shift that's happening, and I don't know what that's going to mean. I don't think it's going to stop violence in our culture. I just think that this is I think it's more of a thermometer than it is a thermostat. So I think it's measuring the level of violence, not just generating the level of violence.
No,
I think we're a culture, and there's a lot of people who worry about the sissification of American culture, right? That we're becoming too soft and too sissies and all this kind of stuff. But I think it's worth, now that we have another 51 weeks before we celebrate this in the way that we do for the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I have to do something.
Well,
about that.
I nearly missed it, so it's kind of unfair for me to even make any commentary because I so don't care one bit. But I want to say this. We need to make peace really exciting. Like, why can't peace be that exciting? Why can't we be jumping up and down for peace? Like, what do we have to do to make it? Like, why is war? Why is football? Why is violence? Why is there always so much energy around these kinds of things? And why can't we get energy like that around peace or sexuality we need to make peace sexy somehow, but in a really good, wholesome, good kind of way.
Well, do you think it's chemical though? Do you think it's a biological, chemical thing that when one watches a violent happening of some kind, like a collision on a football field, or someone charges a building in a war, or a person demonstrates sexuality, something happens in your body. Your eyes see it, your mind registers it. It releases
like a drug.
It releases chemicals, and then you react in that way. And maybe that's biological of getting someone prepared for, the empathy that comes when you watch something is turned into self-direction that you should do something. So you see someone get smacked. Like if you've ever seen someone get punched, your own body sort of gets a shot of whatever blend of chemicals is in you. Like we were at a cheesecake factory last week.
You saw someone get punched at a cheesecake factory?
It was, frankly, everybody at the Cheesecake Factory should get punched for being at a Cheesecake Factory. Those places.
Does that mean I get to punch you because you're at a Cheesecake Factory?
The
I've
food's...
never punched anyone in my life. I don't even know.
But Cheesecake Factories are just the epitome of like a fake construct.
Oh, there's...
You know what I mean? Like kind of blended sort of Roman, Greek, But anyway, there was a gaggle of kids who I think were part of two feuding Somalian teenage gaggles. I don't know if they were gangs or not, but they were, and a 25-person fight broke out in the Cheesecake Factory. Like trays were flying, people were falling on the ground. The blood was on the floor. So I jump up. Some other guys were jump up to sort of go look, and Shelly's like, "Get in there and break that up. Get in there and break that up." And I'm like, I'm not going to break up a fight between two gaggly 16-year-olds that are swinging at each other. But I had my camera out and I was videotaping it. I was recording it. Because, like they weren't hurting. They were banging up the restaurant a little bit, but they weren't hurting anyone other than themselves. They were fighting. They were fighting with themselves.
It in the game.
But I'll tell you, everybody at that who watched that happen, when it was done, you were sitting there like, oh my gosh, like people were shaky. Okay, so that's what's being driven when you watch violent sports. The reason people like it is because it gives you that rush. It's a faux way to be enlivened like that.
So certain things trigger that.
And peace, by definition, stability, comfort releases other chemicals. So it's not going to be exciting like that. Yeah. It can be meaningful. It can be there's probably some other things. So it does seem that someone should take whatever's produced by someone engaging in peacefulness.
It's hard to go against when we're in a culture that we're so steeped in it. It is hard to go against it. I mean, it feels like with food. So often, like I changed my diet significantly like a year ago, and I wanted all the things I wasn't supposed to have: fat, sugar, simple carbs, bread. Like just give me any of that stuff, and I wanted it all the time. Horrible cravings, horrible cravings, and then it took quite some time before I got to where I wanted. And it wasn't that I ate crap all the time, but I ate enough of the other stuff to always keep that craving, kind of elevate. It's like we want the thing that's worst for us sometimes. Our instinctive, biological, chemical, whatever, wants the thing that, and so it makes it necessary to somehow check ourselves, I think.
Yeah,
Be careful.
And perhaps we create a culture, and perhaps something like the NFL, because the the National Football League is unique in the world for sport. There's nothing else like it.
Because
It's not played anywhere else like it's played here, American football, and it produces it, and it has a visceral nature to it that has been well crafted over the last 5 decades. It's really become something of a refined product, distinguishing itself from all the other sports. It used to be that baseball was America's pastime. And there's people who lament this stuff, and they write about this, and they're, I'm echoing little half conversations, I know, so don't believe me too much on this, but
okay.
it used to be that the pastime of America was calculating, like baseball is. It was slow.
Yeah.
It was
So boring.
it took physical dexterity and ability, but also it took sort of a refined skill and way to master it, right?
There's statistics, there's math,
All
it's
kinds
very
of
sophisticated.
Yeah, the hit and
That's
run and the
subtle.
slap,
It's a very nuanced
and
game.
even the home run has changed baseball in a lot of ways, right? Okay, so that used to be kind of the sport, and around the world you'll have soccer being the sport,
Very much.
right? And soccer has a particular rhythm to it. We're gonna have to,
international football.
in the cripes. Come on, you got to be kidding me. We're going to get to the fact that all soccer in Europe and Central America, turns out, has been rigged for the last 10 years. You know this?
No.
Yep, by drug cartels.
Oh, great.
Yep. Okay, so anyway,
That's
hold tight for
really
that.
Sorry to hear
Yeah, I
that.
see I'm getting smug now about the soccer elitists. But perhaps we have crafted a sport that has a kind of speed, a kind of elegance. I mean, you watch a 230-pound running back jump over the top of a 240-pound linebacker running after him. It is unbelievable to watch a human body do the beautiful things these guys do. Or, a guy throw a football, which most people on the planet couldn't even hold. They're so big. Throw that thing 40 yards and hit a guy running at a full sprint.
Yeah.
It is an incredible it is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
But it's also been wrapped in this kind of speed and violence and very hard hitting. I'm like, they've tried to tone that back, but a perfect football hit still has a great propensity to cause a concussion. But maybe what's happened is we've developed a culture that wants that chemical reaction.
Yeah.
And it could be
so
it could be
addicted to it.
it could be thwarted back. It could be pulled back if it were, and it might just be a period of sort of a
transition kind of.
Yeah, kind of a savage, that there was sort of a savage way.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think in post Super Bowl commentary.
Well, and I would like to see us continue the conversation overall in the sense that we can do some good, at least some change would be better than nothing. And that while we may not get it great, I mean, some of us would rather not have it at all, but it'd be better to have something rather than nothing. And that it can make a difference.
Yeah.
Some things can make a difference.
Yeah, and it depends. I guess it's going to shift depending great part on what conversation we're choosing to have around it.
Yes.
Right? If it's there's been lots of critique of football for a very, very long time, right? It seems like this one of the violence that it does to the players and the thrill that other people get on behalf of sport of violence it seems like that's not going to go away, but perhaps. All right, so we have to give a call to our friend Kimberly Yim.
Yes.
So if you're listening on the Spreaker feed, you're going to roll over to a new one. If you're watching on Ustream, you're also going to roll over to a new one. We'll be back here in just a couple of seconds with Kimberly Yim, the author of Refuse to Do Nothing. What if you do just half of that? But anyway, we'll ask her about that.
Refuse to do just